Hi, I'm Misha Ketchell, editor of The Conversation. For democracy to work, people need to be well informed. That's why we work with academic experts to share their research and explain issues in the news. Everything we do is free to republish, but we need your support. Please donate to The Conversation by going to donate.theconversation.com or following the link in the show notes.
From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
It was November 11, 1975, and Prime Minister Gough Whitlam had just been sacked by the Governor-General, Sir John Kerr. The dismissal, as it's come to be known, was one of the most shocking moments in Australian political history. 50 years on, we're taking a look back at that fateful day. I'm Amanda Dunn, The Conversation's political editor. Today, I'm taking over the mic at Politics with Michelle Grattan to interview none other than Michelle Grattan. So, Michelle, you were a young reporter for The Age when Prime Minister Gough Whitlam uttered those now famous words on the steps of Old Parliament House. Where were you when you found out the government had been sacked, and what happened then?
Well, when those famous words were uttered, I was on the steps of Parliament House with many other people, journalists, staffers, the start of a gathering crowd. Everybody was shocked, amazed. We'd heard only a while before of this act by the Governor-General. People were out of the building, some of us at the time. Certainly I was with a colleague when the news came through when we were coming back to Parliament House. Why were we out? Well, we thought there was going to be a half-Senate election. That was the expectation. And, of course, we were gathering our possessions and getting ready to get on the road. Then we heard, as we came back to Parliament House, this surprising news that the budget had been passed, the budget that had been held up for weeks. And of course, that had caused a crisis in itself. And as we walked through the opposition lobby in the old Parliament House, we encountered all these people who were just walking around rather zombie-like, shocked at what had happened.
Yes, it must have been an incredible time to be a young political reporter. Can you remember what went through your mind when the news broke?
Well, firstly, somewhat mystified on hearing the budget had passed and wondering what the hell had happened. And then I guess during the rest of the day, of course, a lot of running around because this was a huge story. And here we were, journalists covering it. As you mentioned, I was a junior reporter, so doing the work of a junior reporter, helping more senior colleagues. And then as time went on, I suppose people were forming views about the propriety or impropriety, as most people around the gallery thought, of what was happening.
What was the reaction like among journalists, Michelle? I mean, this is a massive story and probably, I'm guessing, one of the biggest political stories in your career. Would that be right?
Well, indeed, that's right. The reaction among journalists was just amazement that this was happening, of course, but also an immense amount of running around to try and get the story, get themselves in place to cover the story, follow the events of the day, which were dramatic in the House, where Labor was trying to reverse this by passing motions And of course, there were demonstrations.
And whereas the conditions of unrest
People
the
were
government
flowing into Canberra, and Canberrans were gathering outside Parliament House, gathering outside the Governor-General's residence. There was an immense amount of activity, as well as in many quarters mounting outrage about what had happened.
Was it speculated on that it might come to this eventually? I mean, surely this didn't just entirely come out of the blue, did it?
There had been some speculation, yes, and the opposition, the Fraser-led opposition, had been saying that this should happen, but people were not actually expecting it at that time. There was speculation that some of the Liberal senators might crack and agree to pass supply. And I think that the general expectation was that there would be this half Senate election. Now, the opposition and some commentators said, well, that wouldn't solve anything, but that was the way it was heading in the morning of that fateful day.
And Michelle, in terms of the public reaction, I assume at the time that most people would have first heard about it on the radio news. Probably broadcasts were interrupted to bring people this news. What was the reaction among the general public?
I think the reaction was mixed because this had been a very divisive few weeks. It was already unprecedented to have this blocking of supply for weeks. And so people and the media had split over that. And there were various expectations about what would happen. There was a huge focus on the Governor-General, on the Prime Minister, on the opposition leader. So you did get a quite varied public reaction. Now, it was interesting that you saw these immense demonstrations and a great deal of anger against the opposition, against the Governor-General. And of course, that anger continued through the subsequent election campaign. And during that campaign, I travelled a lot with Gough Whitlam. And you really got a quite distorted picture of what was likely to happen because there were these immense crowds and people were so enthusiastic about Whitlam that it was easy to get the impression that he had more support than, of course, he did at the election when he was absolutely trounced. So the activists were very, very strong on the Labor side.
It's an extraordinary story, that's for sure. We'll be right back. So, Michelle, I guess the big question is, do you think John Kerr did the right thing in sacking the Whitlam government? And what other options might he have had?
I think most of us thought at the time and subsequently that he didn't do the right thing on a couple of grounds. He should have notified the Prime Minister that if the Prime Minister didn't agree to an election, he would take this course of dismissal. Secondly, I think it can be convincingly argued that he should have waited somewhat longer because there was a chance that the Senate would give in and pass supply. On the other hand, the Prime Minister, of course, was saying that he wanted an election for half the Senate. There was this argument that that wouldn't actually solve anything. But once you got into an election campaign, it would then not be possible to do anything else than let that run its course. And by that time, the money would have run out. So I guess in retrospect, one can see a little more of John Kerr's thinking, why he thought he had to act when he did. He thought that if he warned the Prime Minister, then the Prime Minister would be onto Buckingham Palace. That would involve the Queen, and the situation would be worsened. So he had an argument. Personally, I think on balance, the arguments for him warning the Prime Minister taking another course are stronger than the argument for doing what he did when he did. But one can see that it could have reached a situation where he had to act even if he'd have let it run longer.
And given that as Governor-General, Sir John Kerr was representing the Queen in that role, did this give any momentum for a republic at the time?
Certainly, I think the feeling was that there would be momentum for a republic. But of course, it was a long time before that issue was seriously considered and then put to the people, and then the referendum failed. Now, I think since then, the feeling of Australia moving to a republic has diminished because when the republic feeling was at its strongest was in the 1990s, and it wasn't really harking back so much to the dismissal, but it was looking to Australia as a part of Asia in particular, and it was more an expression of our national identity, of national feeling. And in a way, I think that is either diminished or gone off into other channels, probably, to put it more accurately.
And Michelle, when we think about Gough Whitlam's prime ministership, it's often overshadowed by the great drama around the dismissal, but he left a much broader legacy, didn't he? And he's certainly a gargantuan figure in Labor Party history.
Yes, he did leave a massive legacy across many fields of Australian life and government. And I think what he represented and why he came in on a wave of enthusiasm, although not, it might be noted, a huge majority, was that this was a time of change. It was a time of change in the world, but in Australia, there was this feeling, and of course his slogan was, "It's time." But there was a feeling that society was changing, Australia was changing, and you needed a government that reflected and carried forth that change. And the coalition government was tired and, in governmental terms, just old and worn out.
And later in life, Whitlam and then opposition leader Malcolm Fraser actually became friends. How did they manage to find common ground?
I guess both mellowed a bit, and also Fraser moved somewhat to the left. He'd always deny that, but I think that was true. And so they found common cause on various issues, especially actually and interestingly, issues to do with the media and media diversity and ownership.
And Michelle, 50 years on from the dismissal, and given that you've been reporting on federal politics and analysing it for that entire time, how do you reflect on that moment in Australian political history now and its significance?
I think certainly it's the most dramatic moment by far that I saw and experienced, and I think that would be shared by fellow journalists who were there at the time. Nothing really surpassed that, although, of course, we've had many, many dramatic moments since, but that overshadowed them all.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your memories of that momentous day with us.
Thanks, Amanda.
Michelle will be back next week with another political interview, and as always, you can read her analysis on theconversation.com/au. Bye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
An autocrat loves a crisis. A crisis is the way that they mobilize their base.
While America is under invasion from within, we're under invasion from within.
He's testing the boundaries of what he can get away with.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
We've asked 6 of the world's preeminent scholars how we can measure the make of an autocrat. It's a recipe of sorts, tried and tested by the most infamous leaders in history.
Hugo Chavez in Venezuela.
Vladimir Putin in Russia.
Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler.
Viktor Orban in Hungary.
He's basically bulletproof in terms of criminal prosecution.
Join us from December 29 as we explore Trump, the making of an autocrat, from The Conversation.